This couple walked into the forest with working phones and supplies. They never called for help. Sarah and Marcus, both 26, vanished during a September hike in Olympic Forest, 2018. Search teams found their backpacks miles off trail, phones charged, supplies full, but call log empty after 2:47 p.m. 5 years passed. Then researchers found their skeletons, and 15 feet away, an ancient tree covered in dark stains. Both skulls showed the same damage. What happened in those final days? September 13th, 2018, Friday afternoon. Sarah Chen locked the apartment door behind her, double-checking the handle. Marcus Webb was already loading their packs into the Subaru. The Portland sky was overcast, typical for early fall, but the forecast promised clear weather up north. "Did you grab the trail mix?" Marcus called from the curb. "In the side pocket," Sarah said, jogging down the steps. "And before you ask, yes, I packed the first aid kit." They'd been planning this trip for months. Olympic National Forest. 2 nights, 3 days. The Enchanted Valley Trail. Moderate difficulty, well-marked, popular enough to feel safe, but remote enough to feel like an escape. Their Instagram followers had been asking for wilderness content. More importantly, they needed this. Work had been suffocating. Wedding planning had become a second job. The drive took 4 hours. They talked about the guest list, about whether to have a DJ or a band, about nothing important, the kind of comfortable conversation that comes with 3 years together. They arrived at the trailhead parking lot just after 6 p.m. 17 other vehicles. A family was packing up their gear, 2 young kids complaining about sore feet. An older couple stretched by their pickup truck. "You folks heading in?" the man asked. "Just for the weekend," Marcus said, adjusting his pack straps. "Beautiful time of year. Watch for elk near the valley floor." They signed the register. Marcus's handwriting, neat and deliberate. Marcus Webb and Sarah Chen. 2 people. Estimated return, Sunday, 4 p.m. The first mile was easy. Gentle incline, dappled sunlight through Douglas firs. Sarah walked ahead, her blonde ponytail swinging with each step. Marcus filmed her for their story. She turned, smiled, made a silly face. "Best weekend ever," she'd caption it later. Heart emoji, tree emoji. They reached their first campsite by dusk, a clearing beside Kenole River, the water running clear and cold. They set up the tent in 15 minutes. They'd practiced in their living room. Freeze-dried beef stew for dinner. Hot chocolate with mini marshmallows. Marcus told a story about his co-worker who'd accidentally sent a meme to the entire company. Sarah laughed until she had tears in her eyes. At 9:47 p.m., she posted the photo, the one with the caption, their smiling faces, the forest behind them golden in the setting sun. 417 likes by morning. Saturday, September 14th. They woke to mist rising off the river. Sarah made instant coffee while Marcus broke down the tent. The plan was simple. Push deeper into the valley, spend the afternoon exploring, set up camp at the designated site 7 miles in. By 10 a.m., they were moving. The trail narrowed, fewer footprints in the dirt. The forest grew denser, older, trees with trunks wider than cars, moss hanging like curtains, the kind of silence that feels heavy. At 2:47 p.m., Marcus checked his phone. Full signal, surprisingly. Battery at 89%. He texted his mom. "All good. Amazing views. See you Sunday." That was the last digital trace. Investigators would later confirm. After 2:47 p.m., neither phone was ever used again. No calls, no texts, no attempts to reach anyone. But both phones remained on. Both batteries stayed charged for days. Somewhere between 2:47 p.m. and 3:30 p.m., Sarah and Marcus left the trail. There were no signs of struggle. No torn fabric on branches, no dropped items marking a panicked run. Search teams would later follow their path. It was deliberate, purposeful. They walked 4 miles northeast, away from any established route, into old-growth forest where the canopy blocks most sunlight. They didn't get lost. They went there. Sunday, September 15th, 4:30 p.m. Marcus's mother, Patricia Webb, called her son. Voicemail. She called again at 5 o'clock, again at 5:30. By 6 o'clock, she was calling Sarah's phone. Nothing. At 7:15 p.m., she called the ranger station. "They were supposed to be back by 4, Patricia said, her voice tight. "They always call if they're running late. Always." The ranger on duty, Thomas Kellerman, had been working Olympic Forest for 12 years. He'd seen plenty of overdue hikers. Most showed up within hours, sheepish and sunburned. "Let's give it until morning," he said. "Cell service is spotty. They might have just pushed their return time." But Patricia knew her son. Marcus was responsible, organized, the kind of person who set 3 alarms and still woke up before them. At 6:47 a.m. Monday morning, when there was still no word, Kellerman initiated search protocols. The search began at 8:30 a.m. 15 rangers, 23 volunteers, 2 search and rescue dogs named Sadie and Copper, a helicopter from Port Angeles. They started at the last known point, the Enchanted Valley Trail, mile marker 7, where Sarah and Marcus should have camped Saturday night. The designated campsite showed no signs of use, no tent stakes, no fire ring, nothing. "They never made it here," Kellerman radioed to base. The dogs picked up a scent near mile marker 3, strong enough to follow. They pulled their handlers east, off-trail, into dense undergrowth. By Tuesday afternoon, they'd covered 12 square miles. Nothing. Wednesday morning, a volunteer named Derek Mills found something. "Here, I've got gear." 2 backpacks, leaning against a fallen log, 4 miles from the main trail. Zippers closed. Contents organized. No signs of animal interference. Kellerman opened Sarah's pack first. His hands were steady, but his stomach wasn't. Water bottles, full. 2 liters, unopened. Trail mix and energy bars, untouched. First aid kit, sealed in its original packaging. Extra clothing, neatly rolled. Sarah's phone was in the side pocket. When Kellerman pressed the power button, it lit up. 63% battery, no damage. The last activity, that Instagram post, Saturday, 9:47 p.m. Marcus's pack was the same. Food, water, supplies. His phone at 58% battery. The emergency whistle they'd packed, still in its wrapper. "This doesn't make sense," Mills said. Kellerman didn't respond. In 12 years, he'd never seen this. People who got lost rationed supplies. They used their phones until the batteries died. They called for help. They tried. Sarah and Marcus had simply stopped. By Thursday, the search expanded. 150 volunteers, 3 helicopters, search dogs from 2 counties. News crews appeared at the trailhead parking lot. Sarah's mother, Jennifer Chen, flew in from Sacramento. "My daughter is smart," she told reporters, her voice breaking. "She wouldn't just wander off." Something happened. Something must have happened. The story went regional, then national. Portland couple vanishes in Olympic Forest. Their Instagram photos were everywhere. Young, attractive, in love. The media loved that angle. Perfect victims. Tips flooded in. Psychics called with visions. Conspiracy theorists pointed to government cover-ups. A man from Tacoma swore he'd seen them at a gas station in Forks. None of it led anywhere. Week 2. The search radius expanded to 20 square miles. Divers checked the river. Rock climbers rappelled down cliff faces. The K-9 units found nothing beyond that 4-mile point where the backpack sat. It was like Sarah and Marcus had evaporated. Marcus's mother appeared on local news. Her eyes were red, her voice hoarse. "Please," she said, "if anyone knows anything, if you saw them, if you heard something, please." The ranger station received 1,200 calls that week. Most were well-meaning, some were cruel. One woman suggested they'd run away to start a new life. Another claimed they'd been abducted by a cult that operated in the forest. Kellerman ignored them all. He focused on the fact. Fact, they left the trail deliberately. Fact, they abandoned their supplies. Fact, they never tried to contact anyone. Fact, there was no blood, no struggle, no indication of violence at the backpack site. The question that kept him awake, why? Week 3. September rain arrived early that year. The forest became a maze of mud and mist. Search teams worked in shifts, exhausted and frustrated. The helicopter was grounded for 3 straight days. Sarah's father, Robert Chen, organized a vigil in Portland. 300 people showed up. They held candles. They sang. They cried. Marcus's best friend, Tyler Pratt, gave a speech. "Marcus was the most logical person I knew," he said. "He researched everything. He planned everything. He wouldn't take risks. And Sarah? She was the same. They were perfect together because they were both so careful." He paused, wiping his eyes. "Whatever happened out there, it wasn't them being reckless. Something else happened. Something we're not seeing." The crowd murmured agreement. But what? What could make 2 experienced hikers abandon their supplies and disappear? Week 4. The official search was scaled back. 15 rangers became 5. The volunteers stopped coming. The media moved on. A senator's scandal dominated the news cycle. Jennifer Chen refused to leave. Every morning she drove to the trailhead. She walked the paths. She called her daughter's name until her throat was raw. Rangers tried to send her home. She ignored them. "She's out there," Jennifer whispered to Kellerman one afternoon. Rain dripped from her hood. Her hands trembled. "I can feel it. She's out there, and she needs me." Kellerman had no answer. He'd seen this before. The desperate hope of parents who couldn't accept that their child was gone. But the truth was settling in. Sarah and Marcus weren't coming back. By late October, the case was suspended, not officially closed. Families always wanted that distinction, but no longer active. The backpacks were cataloged as evidence. The phones were examined by digital forensics. Nothing unusual. No deleted messages, no suspicious contacts, just two ordinary devices that simply stopped being used at 2:47 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon. The Forest Service issued a statement. Despite extensive search efforts, no trace of Sarah Chen and Marcus Webb has been found. The investigation remains open. Their families hired private investigators. They organized their own search parties. They spent weekends walking grids through the forest, calling names into the trees. The forest gave them nothing. Winter came. Snow buried the trails. Ice made the high country impassable. The search was postponed until spring. Spring came. The snow melted. New volunteers arrived. They covered the same ground. Found nothing. Summer, fall, winter again. Years passed. Sarah and Marcus became a cold case, a mystery, one of those stories people shared around campfires. Have you heard about the couple who vanished in Olympic Forest? They had phones. They had food. They just disappeared. Their Instagram accounts stayed active. Neither family could bear to delete them. Sometimes people would comment on the last photo, the one with the caption, "Best weekend ever. Where did you go? Hope you're safe somewhere. Still thinking about you." The comments became a memorial, a digital gravestone for two people who walked into the forest and never walked out. 5 years and 2 months. November 2023. Dr. Elena Vasquez and her graduate student, Kyle Morrison, were conducting a wildlife survey in a remote section of Olympic Forest. They were tracking elk migration patterns, setting up camera traps in old-growth areas rarely visited by humans. "This sector hasn't been surveyed in over a decade," Elena said, checking her GPS. They were 8 miles from the nearest trail, the kind of deep forest where the silence feels alive. Kyle was setting up a camera near a massive Douglas fir when he saw it. "Dr. Vasquez?" His voice was strange, flat, shocked. Elena turned. Kyle was standing perfectly still, his face pale. "What is it?" I think you need to see this." She walked over, looked where he was pointing, and there, in a small clearing 20 feet away, were 2 human skeletons. They were lying side by side, roughly 1 meter apart, partially covered by years of leaf litter and moss, clothing still intact, faded and rotting but recognizable, hiking boots, backpacks nearby, torn open by animals. Elena's hands shook as she pulled out her radio. "This is Dr. Vasquez. I need to report we found human remains. 2 individuals. Appears to be several years old." The voice on the other end, "Can you confirm your location?" She read off the coordinates. "Jesus," the dispatcher said. "That's way out there. We're sending a team. Don't touch anything." They waited. Elena and Kyle sat on a log 50 feet away, not speaking, not looking at the bones. Both were thinking the same thing. How did they get here? How did no one find them? And why did they stay? 3 hours later, rangers and forensic investigators arrived. By then the sun was setting. They set up portable lights, photographed everything, marked the scene. Kellerman was there, older now, more gray in his beard, but he remembered. "It's them," he said quietly. "It has to be." Dental records would confirm it 2 days later. Sarah Chen and Marcus Webb, 5 years missing, found 8 miles from any marked trail in a section of forest so remote that most rangers had never been there. But as investigators processed the scene, they found something else. 15 feet from the bodies, there was a tree, old growth, maybe 300 years, thick trunk, rough bark, and covering a section of that bark, about head height, were dark stains, brown, weathered, but unmistakable. Blood. The forensic team worked through the night. By morning, they had preliminary findings. Both skulls showed fractures, multiple impact sites, same pattern, same location. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head, Manner of death, undetermined. But the evidence told a story, a horrible story. The medical examiner, Dr. Richard Hall, delivered his report 3 days later. Based on the fracture patterns and the blood evidence on the tree, he said, it appears both victims repeatedly struck their heads against the tree trunk. The injuries are consistent with self-inflicted trauma. The room was silent. How many times? Kellerman asked. Impossible to say definitively, but based on the damage, many. Over a period of hours, possibly days. Days? The fractures show different stages of healing, meaning they survived the initial impact. They kept going. Someone in the back of the room made a sound. Disgust or disbelief, or both. Time of death? Kellerman pressed. 3 to 5 days after they went missing, so roughly September 17th to 19th, 2018, which meant Sarah and Marcus had been alive out there for days, with their supplies 4 miles away, with their charged phones, with the ability to call for help. But they didn't. They walked to that clearing. They stayed there. And in those final days, they took turns slamming their heads into an ancient tree until they died. The question everyone was asking, why? The official report listed the manner of death as undetermined because there was no way to know for certain, but the evidence pointed to one conclusion: shared psychotic episode. It happens, rare, but documented. 2 people in close psychological proximity can share delusions, hallucinations, psychotic breaks, usually in isolated high-stress environments. But that didn't explain the specifics. Why didn't they use their phones? Why did they leave their food and water? Why that spot, that tree, and the detail that kept Kellerman awake? Why did they go straight there? The path from the backpack site to the clearing wasn't wandering. It was direct, like they knew where they were going, like they had a destination. The families were notified. Jennifer Chen collapsed when she heard. Patricia Webb went silent for 3 days, wouldn't speak to anyone. The media coverage was brutal. Headlines screamed, "Couple found after 5 years, killed themselves in forest." But that wasn't quite accurate. Self-inflicted, yes, but suicide implies intent, clarity, choice. What happened to Sarah and Marcus felt different. It felt like something took them. December 2023. The case was officially closed. Cause: blunt force trauma. Manner: undetermined. The families held a joint funeral, closed caskets. 800 people attended. Tyler Pratt gave another speech. His voice was hollow. "We'll never know what happened in those final days," he said. "We'll never know what they saw, what they felt, what made them. We'll never know." The grief in that church was heavy enough to smother, but there was something else too: fear, because everyone was thinking the same thing. If it could happen to Sarah and Marcus, smart, experienced, prepared, it could happen to anyone. The forest isn't just dangerous because of bears or cliffs or cold. It's dangerous because sometimes, for reasons we can't explain, people go in and don't come back. Not because they're lost, but because something calls them deeper. Kellerman retired 6 months later. He'd spent 30 years in search and rescue. He'd found bodies before: suicides, accidents, exposure cases. But Sarah and Marcus haunted him. In his last interview with a local journalist, he said something that stuck. The thing is, they were happy. Every photo, every friend we talked to, every text message, they were genuinely happy. Planning a wedding, excited about life. That Saturday morning they were smiling. He paused, staring at nothing. And then, less than 4 hours later, they walked away from everything. From their supplies, their phones, their future. They walked 8 miles into the forest and destroyed themselves. The journalist waited. What could do that? Kellerman asked. What could take 2 people and just break them like that? No answer, because there isn't one. The clearing where Sarah and Marcus died has never been marked. The Forest Service doesn't publicize the location. They don't want it to become a dark tourism site. But researchers know, and some hikers know, and occasionally someone will make the trek. They say the clearing feels wrong, too quiet, like the forest is holding its breath. The tree is still there. The stains have faded, but if you look closely, you can still see them. Some people leave flowers. Some take photos. Most just stand there, trying to understand what happened here, what really happened. The discovery of Sarah and Marcus's remains opened more questions than it answered. In the weeks following the identification, investigators pulled together every piece of evidence: phone records, social media, medical histories, work emails, bank transactions. They interviewed 47 people: friends, family, co-workers, acquaintances. They were looking for something, anything, a sign that Sarah or Marcus had been struggling, a hint of mental illness, drug use, marital problems, financial stress. They found nothing. Dr. Lisa Hartman, a forensic psychologist brought in to consult on the case, spent 3 weeks building psychological profiles. On paper, they were ideal, she told investigators. Stable jobs, strong social connections, no history of mental health issues, no substance abuse. Their relationship was healthy. Friends described them as supportive and communicative. "So what happened?" Kellerman asked. "That's what we're trying to determine." But the data resisted explanation. Sarah Chen had been a graphic designer at a Portland marketing firm. Her performance reviews were excellent. Her last therapy session, part of routine employee benefits, was 4 months before the trip. The therapist's notes mentioned mild work stress, but nothing concerning. Marcus Webb worked in IT security, detail-oriented, reliable, popular with colleagues. His last physical showed perfect health, no medications, no red flags. Their friends were unanimous. The couple was genuinely happy. They weren't faking it, Tyler Pratt insisted during his interview. "I've known Marcus since college. I'd know if something was wrong. Could they have been hiding something?" the investigator pressed. "No, absolutely not. They were solid, but something had gone wrong, catastrophically wrong." Dr. Hartman focused on the timeline. 2:47 p.m., last phone activity. Marcus texts his mother. Normal tone, no distress. Between 2:47 p.m. and approximately 3:30 p.m., they leave the trail and walk 4 miles northeast into unmarked forest. September 17th to 19th, they die from self-inflicted head trauma. The gap between 2:47 p.m. and their deaths was roughly 72 to 120 hours, 3 to 5 days where Sarah and Marcus were alive, mobile, and making decisions. "The question isn't just what happened," Hartman said. "It's when did it start happening? Because people don't just snap. Not like that. Not both of them at the same time. There's usually a progression, warning signs, deterioration. But there was no evidence of that. One moment, Marcus is texting his mom about amazing views. The next, he and Sarah are walking deliberately away from safety toward something that would kill them. What changed? The shared psychotic episode theory was the official explanation. Folie à deux, a rare psychiatric phenomenon where delusions are transmitted from one person to another. It usually requires specific conditions: close emotional bond, social isolation, high-stress environment, one dominant personality. Sarah and Marcus fit some criteria. Close bond. Check. Isolation in the forest. Check. But the stress? They were on vacation. Relaxed. Happy. And the dominance dynamic? Friends said neither was particularly dominant. They were partners. Equals. Dr. Hartman wasn't convinced. Folie à deux typically develops over time, she explained. Weeks, months, sometimes years. It doesn't just spontaneously appear in a matter of hours. But it's possible? Kellerman asked. Possible, yes, but unlikely. And it doesn't explain the specificity of their actions. What do you mean? They didn't just wander. They didn't exhibit erratic behavior. They walked directly to that clearing. They stayed there. And then they engaged in repeated, sustained self-harm until death. That requires focus, purpose, like they were following instructions. The room went quiet. Instructions from whom? Someone asked. Hartman shrugged. That's the question, isn't it? One theory involved environmental factors, toxic mold, poisonous plants, natural hallucinogens. A team from the University of Washington conducted environmental surveys of the clearing and surrounding area. They tested soil samples, cataloged plant species, analyzed water sources. Results? Nothing unusual. No toxic fungi, no hallucinogenic plants. The water was clean. The air quality was normal. Whatever happened, it wasn't environmental poisoning, the lead researcher concluded. Another theory, dehydration and exposure leading to delirium. But the timeline didn't support it. 3 to 5 days isn't long enough for fatal dehydration, especially in cool September weather. And their supplies were right there. Food, water, emergency gear, just 4 miles away. If they were delirious, why not return to their backpack? If they were confused, why not use their phones? The evidence kept contradicting the theories. Then there was the tree itself. Investigators examined it extensively. The bloodstains were confirmed as Sarah's and Marcus's. DNA tests matched. But beyond that, the tree was just a tree. Douglas fir, approximately 310 years old. No unusual characteristics, no carvings, No markings, nothing to distinguish it from thousands of other trees in Olympic Forest. Why that tree? Kellerman wondered aloud. No one had an answer. A local anthropologist, Dr. Raymond Cutter, was brought in to check historical records. Were there any indigenous legends about that area? Any documented incidents? The Quinault people have stories about deep forest, Cutter said. Places where the boundary between our world and the spirit world is thin. Places where people shouldn't go. Are there specific locations? The stories are deliberately vague. The point isn't to mark dangerous spots. It's to teach respect for the forest as a whole. He paused, looking at the map of the clearing. But yes, there are a few areas considered particularly unstable. This general region is one of them. Unstable how? The stories talk about people who go in and don't come back, or come back changed, not physically, mentally, like something in the forest gets inside them. Kellerman wanted to dismiss it, folklore, superstition, but he'd seen what happened to Sarah and Marcus. He couldn't dismiss anything. Has anyone investigated these stories scientifically? He asked. No. Most anthropologists treat them as cultural narratives, not literal warnings. Maybe they should reconsider. 3 months after the discovery, a journalist named Amanda Reeves published an article in Outside magazine. The Olympic Forest Mystery. What really happened to Sarah Chen and Marcus Webb? The article was thorough. It included interviews with the families, investigators, and experts. It presented all the theories, and it acknowledged the fundamental mystery at the heart of the case. But it also did something else. It revealed a detail that had been kept from the public. Sarah's phone, when examined by forensics, had one anomaly. At 2:46 p.m., 1 minute before Marcus's last text, Sarah had opened her compass app, the kind that shows direction and coordinates. She'd looked at it for approximately 30 seconds, then closed it, and never opened her phone again. What was she checking? The article asked. Investigators didn't know. The compass app doesn't log where you're looking, just that you opened it, but it suggested something. Sarah had been trying to orient herself, to find a specific direction, like she was looking for something. The article went viral. 1.2 million readers in the first week. The case exploded on social media. Reddit threads, YouTube videos, podcast episodes. Everyone had a theory. Some blamed the forest itself, magnetic anomalies, infrasound, natural phenomena that could affect human psychology. Others pointed to foul play. Maybe they'd been chased. Maybe someone had threatened them. Maybe the scene was staged. Conspiracy theorists suggested government experiments, secret facilities, military testing. The wilder theories involved the supernatural, forest spirits, dimensional portals, ancient curses. Most investigators dismissed the extreme theories, but the more mundane explanations weren't working either, because the evidence kept pointing to one undeniable conclusion. Sarah and Marcus walked into that forest of their own free will. They left behind everything they needed to survive, and they did something to themselves that defies rational explanation. 6 months after the article, Kellerman received an email. The sender, Robert Chen, Sarah's father. The message was brief. I found something. Can we talk? They met at a coffee shop in Portland. Robert looked older than Kellerman remembered, thinner. His hands trembled slightly as he opened a laptop. After Sarah was found, I couldn't let it go, Robert said. I kept thinking, there has to be something we missed, some clue. So I went through everything, her computer, her journals, her old emails, and I found this. He turned the laptop. On screen was Sarah's Instagram, a private account she used for personal photos, not the public one everyone knew. Look at the dates, Robert said. Kellerman scrolled. Photos from the weeks leading up to the trip. Sarah and Marcus at dinner. Sarah at work. Marcus playing basketball with friends. Normal. Mundane. But then, September 2nd, 11 days before they disappeared, there was a photo Kellerman hadn't seen before. It showed a book lying on Sarah's lap. The cover was visible. The Hidden Forest. True Stories of Disappearances in America's Wilderness. The caption, Marcus found this at Powell's. We're definitely not reading it before our trip, LOL. Kellerman stared at the image. I tracked down the book, Robert continued. Bought a copy. Read the whole thing. And, Chapter 7. It's about Olympic National Forest. About disappearances. Robert pulled a paperback from his bag, opened to a dog-eared page. Kellerman read. The chapter documented 12 disappearances in Olympic Forest between 1973 and 2015. Most were considered accidents or cases of people getting lost, but 3 stood out. 1986, a solo hiker named James Moreau vanished for 6 days. He was found alive, barely, near Enchanted Valley. When asked what happened, he couldn't explain. He kept saying he'd been called. He refused to elaborate and never hiked again. 1998, 2 college students, boyfriend and girlfriend, disappeared during a weekend trip. Their bodies were found 3 weeks later. Cause of death, undetermined. One investigator's note mentioned unusual positioning, but gave no details. 2009, a family of 3 went missing. Only the father's body was found. The mother and child were never recovered. The father's body showed signs of self-inflicted trauma. "Do you see it?" Robert asked. Kellerman did. The pattern, people going in, not all coming back, and when they did come back, or when they were found, something was wrong. "There's more," Robert said. He pulled out a printed map. "I marked every disappearance mentioned in the book. Look." The dots formed a rough cluster, east of the main trails, deep forest, old-growth areas, and right in the center of that cluster, the clearing where Sarah and Marcus had died. Kellerman brought the information to the investigation team. Dr. Hartman was particularly interested. "If there's a pattern, we need to understand it," she said. "What's consistent across these cases?" They compiled data on every documented disappearance in that region over the past 50 years, not just the ones from the book, all of them. 47 total cases. 31 were resolved as accidents, exposure, or animal attack. 16 remained unexplained or unusual. Of those 16, 12 occurred within a 3-mile radius of the clearing. 9 involved people who had been experienced hikers. 7 showed signs of abnormal behavior before or during the incident. 4 resulted in self-inflicted harm. "That's statistically significant," Hartman said. "This isn't random. So what is it?" Kellerman asked. "I don't know, but there's something about that area, something that affects people." They expanded the research, geological surveys, historical records, indigenous oral histories. One detail emerged. The area was part of an old-growth zone that had never been logged. Some of the trees were over 500 years old. The ecosystem was essentially untouched. An ecologist named Dr. Sarah Voss offered an interesting perspective. "Old-growth forests have unique characteristics," she explained. "The biodiversity is incredible, but there's also something else, a kind of sensory intensity, the silence, the scale. It can be disorienting." "Disorienting enough to cause psychosis?" Kellerman asked. "Not psychosis, no. But confusion? Anxiety? Yes. Some people report feeling watched in old-growth forest, like the forest is aware of them. Is there a scientific explanation? Possibly. Infrasound from wind through the canopy. Low-frequency vibrations that affect human psychology. It's been documented in other contexts. Old buildings, caves. People report feeling dread, seeing things that aren't there. Could that explain what happened to Sarah and Marcus?" Voss hesitated. "It could explain why they felt compelled to leave the trail, why they seemed purposeful. If they were experiencing auditory or visual hallucinations, they might have been following something they perceived as real. It was the best scientific explanation they had, but it still felt incomplete, because infrasound doesn't explain why they'd hurt themselves, why they'd stay in one place, why they'd give up so completely. A year after the discovery, Patricia Webb did something unexpected. She went to the clearing. Against everyone's advice, the rangers, her family, the therapist she'd been seeing, she hired a guide and made the 8-mile trek into old-growth forest. Kellerman found out after the fact. He called her immediately. "Patricia, what were you thinking?" Her voice was calm, too calm. "I needed to see it. I needed to understand." "And did you?" Long pause. "No, but I felt something." "Felt what?" "Like Marcus was still there, like part of him never left." Kellerman didn't know what to say. "It's hard to explain," Patricia continued. "The clearing is so quiet, not peaceful, just silent, like sound dies there. And the tree, Thomas, standing next to that tree, I felt like I was being pulled toward it, not physically, mentally, like it was asking me to come closer." "Did you?" "No. My guide stopped me. He said I was acting strange, said I'd been staring at the tree for 5 minutes without moving." Kellerman's stomach tightened. "Patricia, promise me you won't go back there." "I won't. But now I understand why Marcus stayed, why he didn't call for help. Why? Because whatever was there, it didn't feel wrong. That's the terrifying part. It felt right, like it made sense, like it was exactly where he was supposed to be." After the call ended, Kellerman sat in his office for a long time. Patricia Webb was rational, grounded, not prone to flights of fancy. If she'd felt something in that clearing, it wasn't imagination. It was real, or real enough. The case attracted attention from parapsychologists and paranormal researchers. Most of their theories were easy to dismiss: ghost stories, demonic possession, alien abduction. But one researcher, Dr. Michael Strand from the Institute of Anomalous Phenomena, offered a different framework. "Forget the supernatural labels," he said in an interview. "Focus on the psychological phenomenon. What we're seeing is a localized effect, a specific place that consistently affects human consciousness in similar ways." "How?" the interviewer asked. "We don't know. Maybe it's environmental. Maybe it's geological. Maybe it's something we haven't discovered yet. But the pattern is clear. People go to that area and their decision-making process is altered." "You're saying the forest is what? Mind control?" "I'm saying there's something about that location that interferes with normal cognitive function. Call it what you want. The effect is measurable." The interview sparked debate. Some scientists agreed that localized psychological phenomena were worth studying. Others dismissed it as pseudoscience. But no one could explain Sarah and Marcus. 2 years after their deaths, on what would have been their wedding day, their families held a memorial hike. Not to the clearing. No one wanted to go there. But to the original trail, the place where it all started. 60 people showed up. Friends, family, co-workers. They walked the Enchanted Valley Trail, stopping at mile marker 3, the last known point before Sarah and Marcus left the path. Tyler Pratt spoke again. His voice was steadier now. Time had dulled some of the pain. "We'll never have all the answers," he said, "and maybe that's okay. Maybe the point isn't to understand everything. Maybe the point is to remember them for who they were, not how they died." People nodded. Some cried. But Kellerman, standing at the edge of the group, couldn't accept that, because somewhere between 2:47 p.m. on September 14, 2018, and the morning of September 19th, something happened to two good people, something that made them abandon reason, something that made them choose pain, something that made them stay. And if it happened to them, it could happen to anyone. The clearing remains unmarked. The Forest Service hasn't restricted access. How could they? It's 8 miles from the nearest trail, in terrain most people would never venture into. But word spreads. Hikers talk. Online forums share coordinates. Some people seek it out. Thrill seekers, curious minds, people who want to feel what Sarah and Marcus felt. Most find nothing. Just a clearing, just a tree, just forest. But some report feeling uneasy, disoriented, like they should leave. A few describe something stronger. A pull, a whisper, a sense that if they stayed longer, they'd understand something important. Those people always leave quickly, because they sense what Patricia Webb sensed. The clearing isn't evil. It isn't trying to hurt anyone. It's worse than that. It's inviting. 3 years after the discovery, Dr. Hartman published a paper in the Journal of Forensic Psychology, Folie à Deux in Extreme Environments, the Chen Webb case. The abstract read, "This paper examines the unusual circumstances surrounding the deaths of Sarah Chen and Marcus Webb, exploring the possibility of shared psychotic episode triggered by environmental factors in Olympic National Forest. While the exact mechanism remains unclear, the case demonstrates the potential for rapid psychological deterioration in isolated natural settings." The paper was well received academically, but it didn't solve anything, because Hartman knew, everyone involved knew, that shared psychotic episode was just a label, a way to file the case, a way to make it fit into existing categories. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. We don't know what happened. We don't know why Sarah and Marcus walked into the forest. We don't know what they were thinking in those final days. We don't know why they stayed at that tree. And we don't know if it could happen again. Kellerman retired from the Forest Service in 2024. His last act was to update the case file with a personal note. "To whoever reads this, the official explanation is insufficient. I've spent 40 years in these forests. I've seen accidents, tragedies, human error. This was different. Sarah Chen and Marcus Webb were rational, prepared individuals who made irrational choices. They left behind evidence of purpose without explanation. They died in a manner that suggests compulsion rather than decision." If you're investigating a similar case, consider this. The forest isn't just physical space, it's psychological space. And some places, for reasons we don't understand, affect the human mind in profound ways. Be careful out there, and if you feel pulled toward something you can't explain, walk the other way. Thomas Kellerman. The note stays in the file. A warning for future investigators. A reminder that some mysteries resist solution. Sarah's Instagram is still active. Her mother posts once a year on Sarah's birthday. Photos from before. Memories. Small update. Still missing you. Still looking for answers. The comments are always supportive, but they're also tinged with fascination, because Sarah and Marcus aren't just victims anymore. They're a legend. The couple who walked into Olympic Forest and never came back. Not because they were lost, but because something called them deeper, and they answered. What no one talks about, what the official reports don't mention, is this. In the weeks after the bodies were found, 3 separate hikers reported unusual experiences in Olympic Forest. One claimed she heard whispers on the Enchanted Valley Trail. No one else was around. Another said he saw 2 figures in the distance, walking away from the trail. When he tried to follow, they vanished. A third swore that her compass started spinning erratically near mile marker 3. It corrected itself after she left the area. The Forest Service investigated, found nothing, declared the reports unrelated. But Kellerman kept copies of those reports. Because he remembered what Patricia Webb had said, it felt right, like it was exactly where he was supposed to be. And he wondered, what if the clearing isn't passive? What if it's active? What if it's still calling? The Olympic National Forest is 922,000 acres, hundreds of miles of trails, thousands of visitors every year. Most go home safely. Most have wonderful experiences. But sometimes, rarely, but consistently, someone doesn't come back. And sometimes, when they're found, the circumstances don't make sense. The pattern is there. If you know where to look, if you're willing to see it. 4 years after Sarah and Marcus died, a young couple posted on Instagram. They were planning a hiking trip to Olympic Forest. Excited. In love. The post was full of heart emojis and tree emojis. One of Sarah's old friends saw the post. She sent a message. Be careful out there. Stay on the trails. And if you feel something weird, trust your instinct and leave. The couple responded, thanks. We'll be fine. We're experienced hikers. Famous last words. But here's the thing about Olympic Forest. About that clearing. About what happened to Sarah and Marcus. The forest doesn't care if you're experienced. It doesn't care if you're careful. It doesn't care if you're prepared. Because when something calls you, really calls you, experience doesn't matter. Preparation doesn't matter. Nothing matters except the pull. And Sarah and Marcus proved that even the strongest, most rational people can answer that call, even when answering means never coming back. The final piece of evidence, the one that never made it into official reports, came from a hiker named David Torres. 2 weeks after the bodies were discovered, Torres was hiking in a different part of Olympic Forest, miles from the clearing. He stopped to rest and pulled out his phone to check his location. As he opened his GPS app, he noticed something odd. His phone's compass was pointing northeast, stable, consistent. But when he physically turned to face northeast, he felt a sensation he couldn't describe. Not fear exactly, more like recognition, like something in that direction was familiar, even though he'd never been there before. He ignored it, continued his hike, went home. But 3 nights later, he had a dream. He was in a clearing. There was a tree, and 2 people standing beside it, looking at him. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They just looked at him with expressions that were simultaneously peaceful and terrified. When Torres woke up, he was holding his phone. The compass app was open, pointing northeast. He never hiked Olympic Forest again.